for country to educate, elevate, and promote. Yeah, focus on Liberia, for Liberia, Liberia, for Liberia, yeah. From Monday to Sunday, from Monday to Sunday, it's focus on Liberia. Talk about home affairs, in diaspora, current affairs, reliable information, history, talking about culture, politics, education, entertainment, business, sports, advertisement, articulation. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. From Monday to Sunday. Focus on.
Hey, Larry, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? All
Yes,
right,
I can hear you.
perfect. I know I'm having internet problem. I'm having internet problem here, so I keep coming in and out. So I don't know if you can hear me. That's perfect. I hope everyone else can hear me. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Focus on Liberia on the Marketplace. I'm your co-host, Gabriel. I'm in the studio with Larry. Today we're going to be talking about the Ministry of Commerce and what it can do to help hopefully create jobs in Liberia. And we also have a plethora of things to talk about. We're going to be talking about the exchange rate. We're going to be talking about the price of gas. We also we have protests going on. We're going to talk about some of those protests that took place, and overall, just look at the investment opportunity for Liberia and how, again, the Ministry of Commerce can help promote that area or sector of the economy for Liberia. So, again, as I said, I keep having issues here, but hopefully, this um, internet can bear with me here till we wrap up here.
Yeah, I can
So,
hear you
Larry,
loud and clear. Mhm.
okay, perfect. I'm glad you can hear me. All right. So, as you're aware, the minister of, I think we talked a little bit about him the last time we had a show, which was I think probably last week. He just got appointed, and there's you know Red. I think it was earlier today or probably yesterday. There was a memo that came out. I think it was today that came out about the administration trying to fix price on fuel imports. What do you? I think I may have asked your opinion on in terms of his appointment, his capability. But what do you think of specifically? What do you think about that memo specifically?
Yeah, so I mean, always nice to be on Focus on Liberia. I love to get on some of these platforms where we can discuss some of these issues, allow people to make comments. Let's hear from the audience, see what they have on their mind, and maybe use it as an opportunity to educate people, right? So I always like to see when government officials try to do something that goes against economic norms, that go against what we would see normally happening in a free market society. So the memo that came out yesterday, and I read that memo, and it depends on what they're trying to do, right? So price fixing overall, it's a bad idea. You would think that people would learn lessons after seeing what happened in previous situations, right? Because remember, there was some price fixing done on rice. Then we saw the long lines, people standing to try to get rice
Hmm.
in Liberia. And that person that we are went over to some of the warehouses, and he said, "Oh, we don't have
Hmm.
shortages of rice on the market." But what they fail to understand, when you get involved in price fixing, if you don't allow the market to move freely, you get involved in price fixing. In the short run, it is
Hmm.
okay if you want to bring inflation down, if you want to bring the price of certain goods down or stabilize it. In the long
Yeah.
run, you have just the opposite impact, just the opposite impact in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. So that
Hmm.
memo, I think is a bad idea. So I want to hear your take on it as well, Gabriel.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that. I think um, I I equated to when I read it. I think I read that memo earlier today. I equated to, you know, I think you've lived in New York, rent control in New York, right? And I think you alluded to some of the things that I'm about to say. So initially, when you hear people say they want to do rent control, that means they want to fix the rent at a certain place where the rent won't go up anymore. Now, because for those that are currently looking for, places to rent, that seems like ideal, um, environment. The same thing, those that are actually in rent control or in apartments, that is ideal. That is it from their perspective. That is what they want to hear, right? But you have to look at it this way from a price fixing standpoint. Now, what it does, it disincentivizes. So let's bring it back to the oil, the fixing on the prices, where you're reducing the, I think by, mm, I think you said 4 cents, right? Uh, for every Liberian who drives a car or buy cooking gas, hey, that's something they want to hear. But what it does is it disincentivizes the supplier of those commodities, right? Let's say you're an importer. I am an importer. When I hear that 4 cents, 4 cents might not be a lot, but if you look at the volume, that's a lot of money that is going to come out of our pocket. Let's say if you were an importer, right? So, in essence, if I had a supply, if you have supplies on hand, you will say, okay, I'm going to sell what I have at the discounted rate of less than 4 cents, right? Where everybody's going to be buying gas or fuel for 4 cents less, right? But what it does, you would not the quantity that you used to import into the country, you will reduce that because you're not making profit off of that anymore. So you're going to reduce that. Now, compound out over a period of time, let's say 6 months, you're going on to a year, then we're going into the same thing. I think you mentioned that, right? Where those it won't be rice shortage this time. It will be fuel shortage in the country because the suppliers, they don't have incentives to bring a lot of fuel in the country. So for me, that's when I read it, that's exactly what, and that's basic economics, right? You have to, you look at the supply side, you got to look at the demand side. You can't just fix one side and leave the other side hanging, or else you create an imbalance in that aspect of it. So that's the way I look at it. I think for me, what I would have loved to see is fix do do fix the problem on the supply side where there's, let's say if it was only you and I importing gas in the country, open the market up. Let other people be able to have access to the market. So that way it's just not you and I importing anymore. There's other people that are importing. It will force our hand to reduce the price without you having to come in to say you want to do it. So the market in that case, like you said, the market forces will determine that. So I thought that's what he was going to do. But so when I read it, I had the same feeling that you did as well, that eventually that's we're gonna get into fuel shortage. Right.
Yeah, having someone at the gateway to the Liberian economy, and let me say hello to RSS Pro. The last time he joined the show, I think he said you were I don't know, somewhere in his villa in some part of like I don't know where RSS Pro is today, but we'll be interested
I
in
think he
learning
said I
where he
think
is.
Grand Bassa or something like that.
Somewhere he was. I don't know where the guy is. But yeah, look, I think this is the problem when you have somebody coming in and they haven't really done a true assessment of the market. You see, that's one of the reasons why you have a lot of these underdeveloped countries struggling, right? You come in,
Hmm.
maybe your predecessor was doing all this price fixing. But if you pay attention to the market, what your predecessor was doing, it wasn't very successful. To your point, Gabriel, you set the price of gasoline at a certain amount. You fix that price. Open and here's what determines the price of gasoline. If just to kind of take it back a step, it's all supply and demand, right? We
Hmm.
know if there's
Yep.
less
Yep.
demand on the price of gasoline, we know the price of gasoline will fall because it would have to hit a certain
Yep.
equilibrium where the amount of being supplied equals to the amount being demanded based on a certain
Yep.
price level. But here's the thing. Yeah, I don't know why they do this stuff. If you pay attention to what happened in Venezuela, Venezuela, even as an oil producing country, struggled.
Country.
You
Yep.
know,
Yeah.
when you fix the price of anything,
Hmm.
the price of gasoline, the price of oil, in fact, I think over the past couple of days or so, the price of oil has actually gone up. So if it's
Hmm.
costing the people who are supplying oil, the people who are producing oil and supplying it, if it's costing them a little bit more money, and you're telling them they can only make this amount of profit, they're not going to
Exactly.
sell to you in that market. They're going to
Hmm.
go somewhere else where they have higher prices in order to sell and make their profit. What is impacting the price of gasoline around the world pretty much is what's happening in Ukraine and Russia.
Yep.
What's happening with OPEC? OPEC came out, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago. OPEC came out and said, look, listen,
Hmm.
we're not going to increase production of oil right away.
Yeah.
It had an impact in the market. Even though right now I've seen some reports on some of the major markets that overall the price of oil has fallen, but again, it
Hmm.
is simply because the demand on the demand side is actually falling. So, like what you said, Gabriel,
Yeah.
you do something on the supply side, or you do something on the demand
Yeah.
side. But if you just try to do price fixing, it has never worked. You're going to run into a
Yep.
situation where you
Yeah.
will have shortages on the market because the people that who want to supply gasoline, they will either keep it and hoard it until you remove your price fixing,
Yep.
or they will go to another market. That's where you're going to end up. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, I see Rosas Pro. He's absolutely right.
No.
It's influenced by what's happening in the global market. Yeah, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in
Yeah.
Russia, what OPEC is doing. Uh, Let me add this one thing, Gabriel, if I bounce it back to you.
Yeah. No. No.
If
Go
you
ahead.
look at what's
Yeah.
happening in terms of the ships moving through the Suez Canal and
Hmm.
how the Houthis are attacking ships, those ships now, and I've read several reports because I have to keep up with the market, ships now are avoiding that transit route. So they have to travel all the way down and go around the Cape of Good Hope to circle
Hmm.
around Africa and go back all the way up to the Middle East and Europe. So Europe right now is having an energy crisis. They're having an energy crisis right now because of some of the events that's taking place in the global markets. So those are all the
Yeah.
things that people have to pay attention to. And I think, maybe the minister is just following what he's seen his predecessors do. I don't know what he's drawing, what economic data he's drawing from that to make that determination to fix the price. And like you said, Gabriel, 4 cents might sound like a real small amount,
Hmm.
but over a larger quantity of
Yeah.
gasoline, it's a lot of money. And it
Yeah.
also
And the,
revenue.
yeah, the other thing too is that you have to look at it from the revenue side of things, right? So you reducing the amount by 4 cents, that you're taking literally money out of the government's pocket, right? A government
Yep.
that's already struggling to
You're
raise
hitting
revenue.
yourself.
So
Exactly.
my point is, how is he thought, did he think about, how are we going to replace that? Whatever, if you multiply over how many barrels or gallon that are being imported by how many oil company in the country, that comes, like you said, it comes out to a lot of money. So how are you going to replace that? How's the government going to make up for that? Like, I didn't see anything on that. Just a short memo in terms of, hey, this is what we're doing. But in terms of looking at the broader implication as to if we're looking at this side of the equation, this is what we're doing on this side of the equation. If we're taking this money from the government's pocket, this is other things that we're going to do to, shore up revenue on the other areas to replace it. So maybe I don't know if they thought about that side as well. But and what do the Senate think about that? You know, I
I
don't know
like what
if
you
it's their
just said
decision.
in terms of the impact on revenue. That is a
Right.
major thing you just mentioned, because
Yeah.
that is going to have an impact on revenue. So on the one hand, you might have, and you know something, it would have probably made sense if the Minister of Commerce and the new head of the LRA comes out and the LRA say this
Mhm.
is going to be the impact this reduction would have on revenue, and the Minister of Commerce said, by doing this, we maybe would see some economic growth or be able to give some
Mhm.
justification as to why you want to do it. But
Mhm.
this is the reason why when we see some of these numbers, the economic numbers, these memos, these policies, they seem to have no rhyme or reason whatsoever. People just put them out there
Mhm.
without having anything to support it or back it. And it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
The suppliers has an impact on the price of gasoline. Policies have an impact on gasoline. Despite anything you may believe out there, politicians are always fighting with suppliers and all that stuff. Politicians are not going to win in this game. The market is going to determine what the
Yeah.
price of gasoline is going to be.
Yeah. No, thank you. And I think that is, you know, um, and is sometimes I wonder, what do we think collaboratively to work collaboratively? Like I think you mentioned that, like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Let's say I am the Minister of Finance. Commerce. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I thought, by reducing the price by 4 cents. This is what I think, right? Now, the point here is that is your job, right? Okay, that is my job. That's what I think. But like, I don't think they thought this through. Like you said, had he work with the Minister of Finance to say, okay, this is what we're doing. How do you guys advise, to like work with the Minister of Finance, like you said, work with the Minister of Finance and be able to strategize in terms of, if you're losing money here, what other way can we go about to to shore up that revenue? But this is a decision he made. How that's going to impact the Minister of Finance, because he has to figure out a way to make up for that. And the how do you call them, the LRA, they're only, I don't think they have any say in it, because all they do is just collect, based on what decision these guys make. So um,
But
yeah. And
gasoline has to do with
yeah, go ahead.
energy, right? Gasoline has to do with energy. I
Mm,
think, if I remember correctly, here in the U.S., it's the Department of Energy that actually gets involved they don't determine the price of gasoline, but they do get involved in anything gasoline related and the
yeah.
price of oil related. And I know in Liberia, the Ministry of Commerce is always involved in some of these price fixation and all that stuff. But I don't
Yeah.
know how the Ministry of Commerce got that authority, that mandate. I'm sure it's probably written somewhere in the act that created the Ministry of Commerce. But it just doesn't seem to
Mm,
make any sense that the Ministry of Commerce is doing something that either the Ministry of Finance, maybe the central bank, maybe the LRA, and all those other groups should be involved in. You know, um, and I see some people saying, corrupt individuals are milking billions from poor countries during global conflicts. Well, I think that's what happened in a free market enterprise, Mr. Kamara. But
yeah.
I
So
think
what do
it's a bad idea.
yeah. What do you think? Let's maybe this one last thought, then we move on to the next topic. What do you think about the security implication of that, right? So, and I think you mentioned, I just thought about that because you mentioned that the Minister of Lands and Mines, or Energy, or whatever you call it, you know, because in as much that we don't want to think about it, that is a national security threat. If you start running out of fuel, people start forming line, it create disturbance, instability. I don't know if we look at that aspect of it, like the long-term implication. If we, because of the decision we made, the policy implication, the impacts, if that causes fuel shortage in the country, how do we look at it? What do they look at it from that lens? What is your thought on that?
Oh wow, that's a great. If you really think about it in a broader term, right? That's a great question, because if if fixing the price of a commodity on the market, you've set the price, so that's an artificial price. It will
Mhm.
lead to either a black market, because you run into situations where people, it will have like a shortage. It will have the opposite impact of what you're trying to determine. That's what you're trying
Mhm.
to do. If your goal is to make sure that the price of gas doesn't go above, let's say 4 to 5, let's say above $5, so you're fixing it at a set price, you're going to end up with an opposite impact of what you're trying to do. Because more than
Mhm.
likely, it will lead to shortages, and then people will have to go to some black market or something to buy it, and will be at a very high price. So we have the opposite impact of that. That could, yeah, in terms of security implication, I think, Gabriel, that's a good point, because you will end up with long lines. You will end up with people being frustrated.
Mhm.
You could potentially end up with people protesting, because
Yeah.
there will be some hardship, because goods will not be able to flow freely in the market. And where does they come from? Well, I think we've seen it in other places where people have fixed prices.
Mhm.
And, if you look at countries like what is Venezuela, Argentina, Greece, other countries in Africa where they fix prices,
Mhm.
it leads to shortages, it leads to protests. Protests can lead to some type of, it leads to some instability within the country,
Yeah.
in the long run. In the long run, this thing is not going to have an impact right away. It's not going to have an impact right away. But give it a few
Yeah.
months, let's not moving into a year with the prices being fixed. Yeah, people who are putting gasoline in the market will say, I'd rather take my gasoline over to Sierra Leone or Guinea
Mhm.
or Ivory Coast, where I can get a higher price, than to take it to Liberia, where they're setting the price at
Mhm.
$4 or something. Yeah, so I think you raised a very critical point there, Gabriel. Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are around it as well.
No, I mean it's. I mean, just as you and I are thinking about it, that's what I would think. That should be the moment you think about a policy decision like that. That should be the maybe the first four thoughts that should come to your mind.
Mhm.
And I think we should get away from this whole habits of just doing these two paragraph memo and just putting it out, but really flush out your thoughts in process of how you're thinking about the policy decision
Yeah,
that you just made, right? So like people
yeah.
like you and I will read it and just say, well, what the heck is this guy thinking, right? Maybe I don't. I want to give him the benefit of that. He have thought this out, but
Hmm.
flush out your thoughts on a well articulated. Uh, it shouldn't be a memo, or maybe
Yeah.
communication, or even do a press as to why you're doing what you're doing, and allow
Yeah.
people
I mean,
to
is there
really
a
get a
policy?
insight into it.
That's a
Right,
good point. Is there a policy driving that? I mean, what did he see in the
right.
market to come up with that stuff, man?
I, those are things that he's supposed to be talking about in either the press or some well articulated article.
Yeah, you see what Real Sense Pro is asking over there. I don't know if you want to flash it out there. He's asking, like, I
Yeah.
would like he want to know the relationship between the LPRC. Yeah, in terms of gas price, who determines what? None of them should determine gas prices. River says, not the LPRC, not the Ministry of and definitely not the Ministry of Commerce. They shouldn't determine the price of
Mhm.
gas. The price of gas should be determined by the people who are selling it, and the people who
Mhm.
are willing to buy it at a certain price.
Yeah.
So if Riverside Pro got a gas station somewhere in Monrovia, he's selling the price of gas at 800 LD. And the guy across the street is 750 LD. People will run to the guy across the street who's selling it for 750
Mhm.
LD, and eventually Riverside Pro will have to bring his prices down.
Yep.
Right, Gabe? Right,
And
Gabriel?
yep. And yeah, you're right. And also to because so here's maybe like another side of that, right? Because you know the minister cannot determine the price, but rather that is set by the supplier. And as a minister, you want to make sure that the prices of gallons of gas in the country are affordable to your people. This is why you look at the Ministry of Lands and Energy to negotiate at your reserve in the country, right? Not just your reserve, but to help the supplier that are bringing oil and gas in those countries to be able to afford it on a global market cheaply. So that way, when they bring it in cheaply, they pay cheap cheaper, they get it affordably on a global market. They're able to import it, at a reasonable price. That way, it flatten across the board. They won't be able to sell it too higher up, right? Because you don't determine what they charge when they bring it in the country. So you help them on a bigger stage where, let's say, if they're taking it from Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, where they're able to compete fairly to get a better rate per gallon. So that way, if they bring it in cheaply, it becomes cheaper on the global market. I mean, in the Liberian market, as opposed to you coming in and say, hey, I want you to set the price at this level as well. Yeah.
And I know I see Vincent, he watching from Zwedru Grand Gita. Welcome to the show, Vincent. I don't know how the weather is in Grand Gita right now, but we're glad to have you here. But so that's this whole notion
Yeah.
about, the Minister of Commerce being a good businessman. I mean, Gabriel,
Yeah.
my question to you now, is that a determining factor to become the Minister of Commerce, just being a good businessman? I mean, because the ministry is like a gateway to the Liberian economy. So I don't know. My question to you on that one.
Right. Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Looks like there was a little. Yeah, I can hear you now.
But can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a perfect. So here's a perfect and scenario where I don't believe you being a business person or businessman is a prerequisite to you becoming or gives you the skill set to become the Minister of Commerce. Because so I think I talked about this on the last show we had. Gina Romando, who was the previous governor of Rhode Island, right? There's just someone who before that she was a treasurer, right, of that state. She helped fix the state pension unfunded pension plan. That's what gave her the notoriety, and she ran and became governor. And as a governor, she you know created this tech educational program across the country. She also helped with affordable education, free community colleges, right? So from there, Biden tapped her to be the Minister of Commerce, right? And what she was able to do is pretty much exactly some of the things we talked about here. I think hopefully I took notes earlier. So some of the things she was able to do was to, just purge, pretty much look at policy that create jobs, to help create jobs for the broader economy. Empower is exactly some of the thing I was talking about. Empower businesses and firms and entrepreneurs to grow. So that means you help Liberian businesses. Your role should be helping Liberian businesses to compete in Liberia, but also regionally, right? How competitive they are regionally. So let's say, as I said earlier, let's say you were importing your oil from next door, maybe a few countries over Togo or Ghana, right? How is the Minister of Commerce able to help you compete for cheaper oil in Togo so you'll be able to bring it in Liberia uh, at a not at an expensive price so people can be able to afford it. So for Gina Romano, those are some of the things that she was able to do as a Minister of Commerce. So long story short, without being long-winded, no, you don't have to be a business person. Being a business person, I think in the case that it helps him will be that he will understand from the business person's standpoint some of the challenges, right? So that way, if he's competing from, you know, on behalf of the Liberian businesses or firms or entrepreneurs or people, he will be able to relate to them. So it should help him in a way create policy, but it is not. I don't think it's a prerequisite for that. You know. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a solid point. Yeah, definitely. I think I would agree with you 100%. It helps. It helps understanding
Right.
commerce, which is interaction in terms of the market and all that stuff. So it helps. It definitely helps in terms of him being able to set policies and stuff. But yeah, but you don't necessarily have to be a business person. Like you mentioned, Gina, and,
No.
she has that background as a businesswoman, but also she's a venture capitalist. She understands finance. She understands economics.
Yeah.
And she understands how to create policies to create jobs. So, it definitely will
Yeah.
help. And I will, the administration is new right now. I would love to see how they turn the economy around. And I think that probably leads us to our next topic, which is the loss in value of the Liberian dollars. How does that impact
Yeah.
people right now? You know?
Yeah. So I think before we came on the show, you just checked the exchange rate was I think what is it, 191, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like one
Uh,
USD to about 191
um,
LRDs.
so yeah, so the 191 actually I don't know if, yeah, the economic management team doesn't have anything to do with that, so I don't know what I put that on there, but I think the central bank. Um, yeah, so the exchange rate is 191. Um, so I want to hear your thoughts on in terms of possibly what I don't know if the central bank what they can possibly do, or especially this new administration too, because it's taking up, right, from what you've seen, right?
Yeah, I think from this time last month, like January, it was around 189 or so. It has gone up
Hmm.
to 191. If it keeps going up at this rate, we can see one USD equaling a little over 200 Liberian dollars. That is going to be bad news for the poor people, because poor people spend most of the money. And I think, Gabriel, you agree that to a greater
Yeah.
extent, a lot of people who don't have money, they don't spend most of their money trying to buy food or get gasoline for the
Hmm.
generator or pay tuition or pay their rent. People who have money will usually have a little bit extra money that they will use to maybe go to a movie or maybe buy some, some data to watch something online, maybe watch football. But the poor people, the fact that you spend most of your money going to the market to buy food, when the price of the Liberian dollar falls, it's like a new tax on you, because
Hmm.
now you need more LRDs to buy the same thing you were buying just last month.
Yeah.
You know, so and that's not a good start, man. I don't think the administration has the capability right now to impact the U.S. dollar against
The
the
Liberian
LRD
dollar.
against the U.S. dollar. Yeah. So what's driving it? So
So
yeah, go ahead, buddy.
do you think that it could be also that the US dollar is strengthening against the the Liberian dollar, or do you just think is it could be on that side of it, or it could be also on the side of where the Liberian economy is just becoming weaker and weaker because of the economic activities happening in there. So it could be on either side of the equation. But I haven't,
Yes, sir.
I want to be honest, I haven't. Maybe you have. I haven't really followed up with the U.S. dollars and dollar in the past month or so. So I don't know in terms of strength where it might be
Yeah.
doing against other
But
economies.
despite so that the US dollar index, which is called the DXY, the US dollar index, when you watch it,
Yeah,
it has
yeah.
strengthened against other major currencies. It's not just
Okay.
Liberian dollars that's suffering. And I know even recently the Naira gained a little bit against the US dollar.
Mm-hmm.
But the US dollar has been strong against other currencies. And the reason being, when you have instability in the world, people are looking for places that are secure to put their money. So
Hmm.
the places where they try to store their money will be in the US market or in US dollars. They will try to hold US dollars because US dollars is known as the global currency.
Hmm.
So whether it's the US dollars or maybe the euros, but people will try to hold on to that. And again, it's supply and demand. As more people start
Yeah,
demanding US dollars, the US dollars become stronger and all
yeah,
the currencies around the world fall. So Liberia has no means to control that, to have an impact on reducing US dollars in the Liberian market. And let me tell you
hmm
why quickly, and I'll swing it back to you.
yeah,
I'll give you a quick example. Let's take the Brazilian real, for example, right?
yeah. Hmm.
I can remember one time the US dollar had become so strong against the Brazilian currency. The Brazilian central bank
Yeah.
wanted to use open market operations. They wanted to use economic policies to reduce the value of the US dollar. So let's look at it. Let me put it in simple thing, for example.
Yeah.
So if let's say the price of a car out there is selling for about $30,000, then more people that want to buy that car, the price of the car will go up automatically.
Correct.
Let's say there's 10 cars out there. You have about 100 people trying to buy that one car. The dealership will recognize that and will automatically raise the price of the car.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have 100 people want to buy that 10 car, instead you have 10 people and 1,000 cars, there's an oversupply of the cars, the price of the car is going to come down.
Yeah.
Automatically. So in Brazil, the Brazilian government said, okay, wait a second. There's a huge demand for the US dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead and put a lot of US dollars in the economy. That means people will not be anxious to get it, and the price of the US dollar will fall. That's how the US, in fact, do it here with the central bank, right? They put a lot of, they would, maybe buy the currency if they want to tighten it. But Brazil, the largest economy in Central America, they didn't have enough money to take the US dollars and put it in the market to reduce the price of the US dollar. They couldn't do it. Liberia has no capability to have an impact, because in order for Liberia to bring the price of US dollars down in Liberia, they have to put a lot of US dollars in the market.
They don't have that.
We
don't have that. Yeah.
Nope.
So that side of so we just, by just your explanation, we can just rule that side of the equation out.
Not gonna
What
work.
about right? What about the other side of so that, well, not rule it out. It could be a possibility out there, right? But what about the other side of production within, lack of production within the Liberian economy, where you know that, which is strengthens the currency, right? If you're you have a lot of production going on in the country, it's strengthening your currency, but because we lack thereof, it could be weakening the currency as well, right?
Yeah, and I think you nailed it
What about
right
that
there,
side of that
Gabriel.
equation? Right.
Yeah, you nailed it, because the fact that we import a lot of stuff, that means if you're importing stuff, you got to pay for those things then in a currency in which you're importing it in.
Right.
So if you're importing something from somewhere in one of those, that uses the franc, right? The French franc.
Francophone.
You need to pay in that currency. If you're buying a U.S. made product, you got to pay in U.S. dollars. But what you just mentioned, Gabriel, is absolutely correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're importing less, if we try to import less and we produce a lot of the stuff that we need, that means we don't have to pay for anything in US dollars, and the demand for US dollars will go down automatically.
Yep.
If we can do some basic manufacturing or even cabinets, growing our own food, we won't need to import US dollars or use US dollars to pay for those things. And automatically people will say, oh, I don't need US dollars, I can need my Liberian dollars, right? And they would just use the Liberian dollars, and that would have an impact on the currency. But I don't know if you read this, Gabriel. The new president of Argentina just came in, and he wanted to go full dollarization. He wants to get rid of, in fact, he's doing it. He's getting rid of the Argentinian, what is it, pesos? I think so. He's getting rid of the currency, and he's going full
He's getting rid of that currency and replacing it with US dollars?
With US dollars, 100%. Quite a few countries out there uses US dollar exclusively. Panama, I don't think they have their own currency. Panama uses US dollars. Quite a few countries out there uses US dollar exclusively.
Wow.
But Panama is successful in terms of it has matured in a Panamanian economy. It reduces inflation right away. Boom.
Yeah.
That's one way to deal with inflation. Go full dollarization. That is a major risk. If you go full dollarization, it's a major risk.
Yeah, I mean I don't want to go on a tangent here, but if you do that, I mean you should never get on the bad book with the United States, because they can use that currency against.
You're right. You're at their mercy.
You can never go on the bad book with them, because they can use our currency against you. Because it has become so weaponized that I think a lot of people countries are removing away from it and diversifying their foreign reserves. So if you go fully US dollars, I mean you always have to be on their good graces.
Exactly.
God, there you go on the other side. And wow.
You see what they're doing to Russia? They're putting Russia on all those sanctions lists. they squeezing Russia with those sanctions, and I think Russia for the first time missed some of its debt payment. You're right. If you go full dollarization, you
Mhm.
can't be in the U.S. bad books because the
Yeah.
U.S. can use that against you. You're absolutely correct in that, and that's why I see my man Riverside Spring saying that's a major risk. But Zimbabwe, I think Gabriel, if you remember, they had hyperinflation, right? Prices of food in
Yeah.
Zimbabwe at one time.
It's still there.
Yeah, you be sitting there eating a bowl of soup. By the time you finish the price, you walk in at that price and I double. That's how bad.
It's still happening there. Yeah. Yeah.
At one time, they went full dollarization. It solved the problem, but then they went back to using their own currency, and then boom, they probably came right back again because you can't tell politicians don't print money. They don't understand that part, you know. So
Yeah.
this
That's
is a massive risk, man. Let me throw this thing out there to you, Gabriel. This was something I
uh-huh.
suggested
Yeah.
because of this Minister of Defense confirmation thing. I threw this thing out there. I
Yeah.
said we need to do away with the armed forces of Liberia.
Mhm.
Take those people who are in the armed forces right now and put them with the maybe set up, kind of merge them with the police.
The
And
EPS. Yeah.
and when you get rid of the armed forces, you can have a
Yeah.
treaty with like the United States to provide defense, to provide, set up an army, U.S. Army base in there and be able to provide you with the defense you need. There are a lot of countries using that strategy right now.
I
Panama,
think
some other
Japan
countries.
does.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
They're using that strategy right now. It is saving them a ton of money. And
Yeah.
in addition to that, the U.S. is pumping more money in because they either have a base in there
Yeah.
and you have U.S. personnel in the country, the U.S. providing security to them, and you don't have to deal with some of the recurring expenditures you see in your budget.
Mm.
It's radical, but I don't know. What do you think?
That's man, I don't think I've thought about it that way, but now that you brought that up, that is um I think at one point Japan was at that they had
Yeah.
that treaty when that yeah that with right
Well, what,
and
mhm.
right so I want to look at the upside of that recommendation, right? So the upside of that recommendation would be that like you mentioned, right? There will be no more spending on your military because you have a treaty where it's being provided for, right? And the other upside would be if the US set up a military base in your country, you could have that is by default foreign direct investment coming in continually every year because they'll be spending on the military in that country. The military will be spending, uh, the military will hire people, just like the army. The army brought, a lot of economic activity to Liberia, right? The other upside could be something that we've always had, right? Where the coup being started by the military. Because let's say our history, if you look at our history, where the the chief of the defense minister or the army brigade doesn't
Mhm,
feel comfortable with what's happening in the economy, he can just stage a coup and come and overthrow.
mhm.
So at least from that, you eliminate you have those are the upside. So if you have that, you eliminate the possibility of coup coming from the military. But here's the
Yeah,
other side of that equation too.
right.
Um,
I think we lost you, Gabriel. Well, waiting for the other side. So while Gabriel is reconnecting, he's right. If you have a treaty with the U.S. to provide the security that you need right away, you're reducing your recurrent expenditures. You're taking the people who are right now in the army, you're merging them with the police, and you're providing security on your border, and you're providing more security within the different counties. You have foreign investments coming in right away because the U.S. will be able to supply, goods and services coming in because of the military being in there. And it was the U.S. that ended up building RIA, right? So who knows? You might end up getting a brand new airport as well. So just waiting for Gabriel to reconnect, right? So yeah, definite. There are so many countries out there. It may be a little over a dozen countries or so that have treaties with other countries, whether it's France, whether it's the United States. to be able to do away with the armed forces. Armed forces in Africa are notorious for coup d'etat, forcefully removing an elected president. The last time Liberia was, the armed forces Liberia, being sent over to assist in other countries, which is part of the whole ECOWAS agreement that we have. But I tell you this, if you were to reduce your current expenditures by getting rid of the armed forces, just a thought. I'm not saying, it's permanent or it's a fix all, but it's just a thought, something for people to think about. Who knows? It may be an opportunity to reduce some of your expenditures. So I see Flomo was asking, I thought Russia and other countries were forming a currency. What happened to that? Well, we know the BRICS nation, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they have that agreement amongst themselves. So I think what may have derailed that, and I don't know if it was actually formed, but I know exactly what you're referring to, but I think what may have derailed that whole currency was the Ukraine war, the war between Russia and Ukraine. Russia now is completely distracted in terms of, moving forward with some of the agenda items they had. But the whole BRICS, the BRICS, those guys were formed to offset the kind of power that the U.S. have, the U.S. dollars. But the U.S., I'm telling you, man, they have so much control of the world economy that having an alternative currency out there, whether it's the euros, which is the reason why back in '99, the European Union formed in order to be able to create some other currency that people can depend on other than just the US dollar, right? Yeah, River says, Pro, I hear you. I think we need a small army. Yeah, maybe just a small militia or something like that. But if you have issues with so much of your budget being spent on recurring expenditures, look for another way to get that thing done, And one thing for sure, you will not be having some of the issues with Prince C. Johnson, I believe is the new Minister of Defense coming in, and running into this kind of issues that he's actually running into, So what else is happening out there? Still waiting for my man Gabriel. If you guys are just joining the show, it's rare that you will see me here by myself. I'm usually here with Jimmy Eastman. I'm here with Gabriel. I'm here with Alex Coffee Brown. Alex Coffee. I want to say Alex Coffee Brown. I'm here with Alex Coffee as well. Keep thinking of his family member. And also, in addition to that, Depu Zo, our own man, who is now an assistant minister and Ministry of Finance. So hopefully one of these days we'll be able to bring him on. Why Liberian gas ships get sanctioned by American? Daddy boy. So the ships are not Liberian gas ships. They are flying Liberian flags, right? Liberia as well as Panama, those are the two main countries where companies tend to register their ships. So some of those ships that are being sanctioned, they are being sanctioned because they're either violating U.S. sanctions law in terms of moving oil either with Iran or maybe moving oil with either Russia. So Russia has a sanction program. Iran has a sanction program. And because these ships are registered with a Liberian flag, so when you look on the OFAC sanctions list, OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, when you look at the list and you see Liberian ships, those ships are only registered by a company called LISCA, right? LISCR, the Liberian Shipping Registry. Those ships are only registered under the Liberian flag, but they are not, in fact, Liberian-owned ships. So when you see some of those sanctions out there and it says Liberian ship, that's more than likely those countries, Russia, maybe Russian oil or Iranian oil, or some other country that is under U.S. sanction, flying Liberian ship. That's the one that is currently being hit by the sanction. But the U.S. government is using sanctions to change behaviors, right? They're not using sanctions to kind of, maybe change governments or anything like that, just to change behaviors of individuals, change behaviors of certain governments. And they're using the sanctions to influence foreign policy. America is always afraid, always, and they got good reason to be afraid. They got their 2 cents, they got their paws in pretty much everything around the world, and they're concerned about that. So they tend to do all of these sanctions to kind of change people's behavior. But think about what's going on in terms of the price of agricultural products in Liberia, the sanctions against Russia, and what's going on in terms of Hamas and Israel. So you have an energy crisis right now in Europe. That's because the war in Ukraine and all the sanctions that they put against Russia, Russia said, look, if you guys are going to sanction us, we're not going to supply gas to Europe. So I'm telling you, the world is a scary place at times because you have all of these, and I think someone mentioned it early in the chat, you have all of these superpowers, right? Who was it that said it? I think it was, I don't know if it was Vincent but someone mentioned it early on, that you have all of these superpowers, kind of doing all these things, and the poor countries are the one being impacted by it. Yeah, Russia decides that, look, listen, you guys are going to sanction us. What are we going to do? We're going to hit you back. Why? We're going to reduce the supply of gasoline or oil in certain regions. We're going to reduce the supply of agriculture to other countries as well until the U.S. can change or lift the sanctions. Sanctions do get lifted, but the process of getting that done is a very complicated process, So let me see what happened to my man, Gabriel, and see if, let's see, Rivers Pro says, do you think the market in Liberia is responding positively to Joseph Boykott's victory? Can we say the exchange rate in Liberia is a sign? That's an interesting question. So if you have a lot of people looking to invest in a country, and the more people you have coming to the country and start investing in the country and maybe looking to farm, maybe to set up shop, it will have a positive impact on the exchange rate because the exchange rate will start to lower because of some of the economic activity. If you have a lot of people sending remittances to Liberia, it will also have a positive impact. You can also have an impact on the exchange rate based on what the US dollar is doing as well. If the US decides to put a lot more dollars in the market, it will also have a positive impact on the exchange rate, meaning the Liberian dollar will gain strength against the US dollar because the US dollar will become weak. So to your question, Rivers Pro, I think it's too early to determine if the market is responding to President Boykott's election because we haven't seen any of the economic data yet from the central bank. So when the central bank start putting out some economic data in terms of how the Liberian economy is doing, then we will say, okay, when people have a good, strong feeling about a certain economy, then they will start putting money in there. If you're in America and you feel strongly that the election of President Boycott is a good thing, you're going to start maybe building houses in Liberia, maybe setting up a farm, maybe looking to invest in solar panels, maybe some light manufacturing in Liberia. But we haven't seen any of that stuff yet. So I think Rivers Pro, we just probably have to wait, give it a little bit of time before we actually see any impact on the election of Boycott. But it will be. I think he's coming in at a time where things are going to be hard, because he's coming in at a time where you have two major conflicts taking place. The one in the Middle East, the one over in Europe right now taking place, and that's going to have an impact on prices in Liberia and everything else in Liberia. So, so Britain stopped taking gas from Russia because that country has zero oil reserves. Okay. I think Britain was influenced, may not be out of their own free will, because Russia said, look, we're not going to supply you guys. So Britain also had to look for an alternative measure. But the interesting thing is, Daddy Boy, look at the US, for example. The US has a ton of oil reserved just because they know there are instances where when there's a conflict, the price of oil will get impacted. If the U.S. is having issues with any of the oil-producing countries, Iran, look, guys will say, look, we're going to cut back. So what the U.S. do? They build up their reserves for oil. Do we have that kind of oil reserves or gas reserve in Liberia? Probably not. Gabriel says, Pro, do you see America double standards on these sanctions? Of course, America has double standards on the sanctions. Did I tell you why? The United States is not a party to the Rome Statute, right? The Rome Statute that introduced this whole thing about war crimes. United States, Russia, they're not a party to that. United States is always pushing for people to get charged for war crimes, but they themselves cannot be brought up on charges of war crimes. But when you are in poor, then when you say double standards, maybe you need to be a little bit more clearer what you mean by double standards, right? Because, for example, I think if I remember correctly, Russia did sanction a few American government officials, but Russia's sanctions against Americans is not impactful because America doesn't invest a lot in Russia. Russia invests more in America than America investing in Russia. So in terms of double standards, yeah, I mean, and the only reason America can get away with it because they are the main superpower out there right now. So if you're a poor African country and America sanction you, what are you going to do? You're going to say, oh, we're not going to stand for it. We're not going to do business with you. You'll probably be shooting yourself in the foot. You'll be harming yourself. So if a superpower like America wants to have double standards, they can have the double standards. And there's nothing anyone out there can do to stop that, And if you think about it, this is the reason why when you listen to the late Nelson Mandela, you listen to a lot of the prominent African leaders, you even listen, some people do not like what Paul Kagame has done in terms of human rights in his country. They do like what he did in terms of growing the economy, but they don't like what he did in terms of the human rights. But Paul Kagame said some of the same things that you're saying over here. Why should we let a foreign power tell us how to rule our own people if we cannot have an influence on how that foreign power is ruling themselves? Let me rephrase this. Think about what happened. Look at what's happening with the American elections right now. You have a situation where a former president has, I think, about 91 charges against him. And if he gets convicted on anything felony related in America, if you get convicted of a felony, you cannot vote in the election. So if the former president gets convicted, he cannot vote in the same election where he's running in. So, but it is the same America that is telling us how to run our own elections, how to do this, how to do that. So in terms of the double standard, yeah, the double standard does exist. Some people do not like President Trump. Some people said President Biden is old. And you saw the most recent report that came out, right, against President Biden when he was investigated for keeping classified documents after, he left office. What can I tell you? Double standards do exist. But this is a reason why you need to be in charge of your own economy and don't depend on foreign economies to get things done out there. So let's see. I'm still waiting for my man Gabriel. I hope you're not out there hiding in the backstage. So Andrew Colley is asking, I think market is responding in the negative for now. For example, a 25 kilogram of rice from LRD from Liberian dollars, 3,300 to 3,500 or more. So I don't know, Andrew, if that is because of the election, or is it the fact that 37% of all the agricultural products out there comes from between Ukraine and Russia. So, and also in terms of the shipping lines is extremely expensive to ship goods and services right now because of the what's going on with people in Yemen attacking ships. Ships have to go through this narrow space. And you can be onshore in Yemen and you can hit some of those ships there that's trying to get through to the Suez Canal. You can do that. So I don't know, Andrew. I think the prices may not be responding because of the election. I think they may just be responding because of market forces out there right now. It's becoming pretty expensive to move goods around. And this is the reason why, how can Liberia be so rich? Fertile land. You stand in your back, you stand in your house, you stand from your window, you throw something outside with growth. But we have food insecurity. We can't feed ourselves. We're trying to do farming the old-fashioned way when we should be doing mechanized farming. And we cannot do those farming because we don't have the money to bring in the equipment we need to do the farming. It is a sad thing. We keep using the same mentality. Oh, I would run to the World Bank. I would run to the IMF. I would run to the African Development Bank. I would run to the EU. I hope Japan would come in and give me some free money. I hope the Saudi or the Kuwaiti would come in. The Kuwaitis would come in with some free money. That stuff never works anywhere in the world. You're waiting for free money. And it's not even necessarily free because you have to pay some of it back, especially the one to the IMF and the World Bank. What they got to be doing, what they have to be doing, what they must be doing is going to Wall Street, going to what we call the sovereign debt market and raising capital. And I wish Gabriel was here because he just posted something about one of the African countries. I think they raised almost $750 million. They raised a lot more money than they were actually asking for. And they got bad credit. They have bad credit. And they were able to raise almost $750 million. And the silly thing about it is they're raising the money to support the budget as opposed to raising the money to put in some developmental projects that would lead to job creation and growth. They're raising the money to put into the budget, which more than likely will go to recurring expenditures. And they're going to end up defaulting on that money that they're raising. Their credit rating is in junk status, but they're still able to raise $750 million. And one time, Bama Kamara was on Focus in Liberia, and we asked him about this whole credit rating. And he said why he was the finance minister at the time under Ellen, he was trying to do something about it. But what I didn't understand was, what is it that he managed to do or was trying to do that he never made it possible to get Liberia credit rating? In America, you can't go buy something without good credit. If people will check your credit. It's the same thing for countries. If you want to get money to do development projects, you got to go and borrow money. They will check your credit. Ghana has good credit rating. Ivory Coast got good credit rating. South Africa, Botswana has one of the best credit rating. Botswana credit rating is right up there with credit rating of European countries and the United States. And Botswana only been around since November of 1966, maybe. I think Botswana like 57 years old, 58 years old. So much better. So Riverside Pro is saying, so Andrew, your question, I think it has to do with the market forces. It may not just be the election. So let me see what my man Gabriel is doing. Sierra Leone president just killed a group of protesters. How are they still getting grants from the international community? That's another double standard. What? I don't know, Riverside Pro. I don't know if that was an intentional act, because if that's what he did on an intentional basis, then more than likely he would end up going to The Hague, right? To the International Criminal Court, the ICC, to stand up against that. So I'm not sure. I don't know the full story on that. So I'm not going to speculate on what that is all about. Riverside Pro saying, what is our credit rating? I think we're one. I think Liberia and how many other countries in ECOWAS? We have no credit rating, zero, zilch. No credit rating, nada. So that's bad. We need to get credit rating. Why do we not have credit rating? Well, when you ask the international community for debt forgiveness, remember in, 2010, we had almost 3.9, almost 4 billion in debt forgiven. When you ask for debt forgiveness, which is pretty much like filing for bankruptcy, you just nullify your credit rating. You just flush your credit rating down the toilet. So you have a choice. Do not flush my credit rating down the toilet, or struggle to not flush the credit rating down the toilet, or struggle to make payments on a debt. Liberia couldn't make payments on the debt that they had with the international community. So they had to go for the debt forgiveness. They got the debt forgiveness, and the credit rating went down the hill. It went down the toilet. So now we're stuck in this cycle where we can only get money from the IMF or the World Bank, or we get grants from the EU in the different places that President Boyka mentioned in his annual message. So that's the problem. That's where we are right now. And we can get out of that cycle. How do I know? Other countries have done it. They have managed to get out of those cycles, you know. I'm not sure, Daddy Boy, did I follow your question? You're saying maybe it's a civil war, that's why. Maybe if you say a little bit more, I will understand, be able to follow what you're talking about. Is no credit rating better than bad ones? No. In terms of a sovereign debt, meaning countries borrowing money, no credit rating is just as bad as bad credit rating. Because Wall Street and the international market, if you go to get what we call like a euro bond or a dollar denominated bond, if you have no credit rating, it's just as bad sometimes as even a bad credit rating. But then it goes to the point that some countries with even some B- credit rating can still get money. I think it's better to have good credit rating no matter what than bad credit rating or no credit rating. Because even the people with bad credit rating, they're borrowing money. People with no credit rating can still get money from the World Bank or the IMF. So you're in the same boat. The difference is how much money you're going to get. When you get in the IMF program, you have restrictions. When you borrow from the international community, sometimes that money is unrestricted. So for example, the Ministry of Education can put out a bond. They can go to the international community with a bond that says they want to raise money to improve school, to rehabilitate the schools and do a whole lot of stuff in the education sector. And then the money generated from all this activity can use to repay the bond. But the Ministry of Education can't do anything because if we're in an ECF program, the IMF controls who we can borrow money from. In fact, the IMF said you can only borrow money if it's on a concession agreement. A concession agreement doesn't work because you are, in fact, giving away your natural resources. And you see how many times people protest, right? We have concession agreement, but the concession agreement saying the company with the concession should be doing this amount of investment in the counties, and the countries just don't, the companies just don't do it, and nothing happens to it, So, one guy said, you think we're in serious trouble in West Africa due to the crisis in these places that you mentioned? Yeah. We get everything, and yet we are hungry in Africa. Rich, raw land, GMP government leadership that's the story. We have over 1 billion people poor in Africa, my man. 1 billion people poor in Africa. And Africa has some of the best natural resources. You hear people making comparisons. I think I saw Simeon Freeman the other day making comparisons with Singapore. We all tend to use Singapore as a means to do comparison, which is good. If you want to be somebody, your country, you should look at places like Singapore, places like Hong Kong, places like Taiwan, places like China. Liberia is doing much better than all those places, China, Hong Kong. But those countries have come and have passed us. And we have more resources. We have timber. We have iron ore. We have gold. We have diamonds. We have beaches for tourism. In addition to that, Liberia has the largest contingent of its citizens in the diaspora, which can help with remittances back to the country. In addition to that, Liberia, because we know at one time we had a pretty good economy that was growing, not at the rate that it could have been, but again, the economy wasn't fair to everyone because you had just a small segment of the population benefiting, and a lot of people are still poor. But the fact that we have been there before, we can also get there. So with all the natural resources, we're still poor. Who came up with the idea about credit rating? We're talking about Liberia credit rating. If you're asking who came up with the idea, the concept of credit rating, I'm not sure where. I know in terms of the U.S., the whole concept of credit rating for individuals, it started amongst different businesses in the U.S. Credit rating have been around for a long time in terms of like bonds and all that stuff. They've been around since what? I'm not even sure when that whole thing comes out. But the company, there are three major companies, maybe four to a certain extent, that do this credit rating stuff, the calculations on it. You have Fitch. It's a company called Fitch. You have a company called Moody. You have a company called Standard & Poor's. And then to a certain extent, you can even use things like maybe Dun & Bradstreet. So those companies are the ones who do a lot of the credit rating, or who do primarily all the credit ratings for different countries out there. So those credit ratings, Fitch, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, is different than the credit rating you see in the US from Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Equifax, Experian, TransUnion is for individual credit rating. Fitch, Moody's, Standard & Poor's is for countries credit rating. And they do credit rating on different types of international bonds as well. So let me see what my man Gabriel is up to. I don't know. I would not say Boycott is in trouble. I think it's like the semester is just starting. You can't fail the students in the class if the first marking period hasn't even ended yet. So you have to give it some time. When we start seeing the central bank put out the numbers, then we can go ahead and we can start grading them and saying, okay, whether they're going to pass at the end of the semester or they're going to fail, Any news on Wologisi that was recently associated with the Ghanaian meeting in our news? I don't have anything, any updates on that. Didn't hear about it. I can't even speculate on it. I think at some point we need to stop. So, Joy, here's the deal. One thing that let me focus on Liberia for a second to use the phrase. So we haven't been good at calculating the value of our resources, because when you see all these companies running to Liberia, for concession agreement, those concession agreements could be worth maybe 10 times more than what we're selling it to them for. Because if I remember correctly, I think it was either the owner, the CEO of Golden the oil palm producer company, that he was dancing and celebrating. He was dancing and celebrating because he was getting some natural resources for pennies. And he was going to the international market and selling it and making billions. So when we do concession agreement on things like Wologisi, right? We don't know the true value of it. And Wologisi might even be worth more in terms of tourism and using the iron ore for production in Liberia, whether you want to use it to, do steel, do rebar, do any of that stuff, as opposed to shipping it out. We haven't done a good job in assessing the true value of our natural resources. We need to kind of rethink the way we're actually doing things. We need to rethink the way we're doing things, because if we bring more, and Liberians and diaspora should invest in Liberia. That's why I'm hoping one day I can bring the new deputy minister for the Ministry of Finance. Your own focus on Liberia, man, Depuzo. You can't say that so we can have a one-on-one conversation, because I think Depu will need to come out here so he can encourage Liberians to go back home and invest. And we can show some avenues where you can invest in, But I think we need to spend more time training the young people back home, as opposed to this whole nonsense about everybody in America running to Liberia for a government job. Yeah, man. Sorry, I don't do that stuff, man. The chairman, the party. Man. Don't run to Liberia for government jobs. Run to Liberia, train a younger generation. And Boycott, I'm not President Boycott gives people the opportunity to train the young people in Liberia so they can get these jobs because they're on the ground. But just because you help a political party come to power, that means you're entitled to a government job? That's the wrong mindset. You're not going anywhere with that kind of attitude. You're not going anywhere. Because you end up in the same situation that, what his name? The guy said who wrote that book, Why Nations Fail. You get up in the same situation when you bring in people who are incompetent simply because they're from your county. They're your kinsmen. They're your family member. You end up bringing people in who may not even be qualified, but because you have that kind of relationship with them, so you bring them to power. And that's why a lot of African countries tend to fail. We follow the same failed strategies every time, So what we got here, Rivers Pro. I'm about to wrap up because I see my man Gabriel just pinged me, say he's having some technical issues. Okay, so Gabriel is having some technical issues. I'll give him maybe another 5 minutes. Let's be honest, based on past leadership trends, are you optimistic? Based on past leadership trends, are you optimistic about the future of Liberia? The economic prices of basic commodities? That's a tough question. Am I optimistic? I would say I am to a certain extent. I think Liberia still has an opportunity where you can have a lot of Liberians becoming millionaires with the right fiscal policies, with the right monetary policies, with the new administration fixing the doing business in Liberia. It should be easy for you to come into Liberia and set up a business. And it shouldn't take all this rigmarole to get a business started. And having a strong judicial system in a country where if somebody were to cheat you, you can take that person to court, win the case. Not a situation where I heard the new finance minister, Minister Obama Kamara, saying, somebody owe you money and the person can go and sue you. And because they have the ability to influence the judicial system, they can win that case against you. They owe you money and they can sue you and win. I was like, whoa. And that's the only reason why international partners and international community are hesitant in bringing foreign direct investments to Liberia because we don't have a strong judicial system. One of the core principles of finance is the regulation, the regulatory body in a country. If you have good regulation, good financial regulatory body, you'll be able to improve foreign direct investments to that country. Look at some of the people there who did some shenanigans in Liberia. When they ran to America trying to pull the same shenanigans, they ended up being arrested and in prison. The former managing director from the airport, you guys know who I'm talking about, right? She got involved with that COVID money, and the Department of Justice went after her. In Liberia, she wouldn't have been prosecuted. She would have gotten away with it. Investing in Liberia is brilliant, but trust and honesty are the keys. Yeah, you see, that's what I was just talking about in terms of the regulations, in terms of the judicial system. We have very weak judicial system. If you don't have a strong judicial system, it's difficult for you to bring in investments because one or two Liberians go down there, they get gypped, their money gets stolen. They will come back to the US, go back to Europe, go in other places, and they will spread the word. And the word going out there saying, oh, I try to do business over here. The people that ate my money, even the young children that eating my money, they ate my eyeball out, all the things. That has a negative impact on negative impact on foreign investments. So people not want to come to your country and invest. But there's a way around it in terms of how you can deal with the trust and honesty part of it. There's a way around it, which I hope, the Minister of Finance, he being a financial and economic guy, he'll be able to recognize the way to deal with that problem. It's called the issue of moral hazard, right? For example, war guy, if you come to the bank and you say you want to borrow money to go buy insurance for your car or buy insurance for your business, when a bank hands you that money, what guarantee the bank has that you're going to use the money for its stated purpose? The bank is doing it on faith. The bank has no guarantee you're going to take that money and go and buy the insurance you promised to buy. So that is referred to as moral hazard. And that moral hazard will always exist, whether you're in Liberia or in America, but it's just even worse in Liberia. But there's a way to deal with it in Liberia. There are ways to get around and put something in place that will reduce the moral hazard when you do something like that. All right, so I'll give it maybe another 7 more minutes, and then I'll hop off here. So we're just doing Q&A because my brother and friend Gabriel had some technical issues and had to get off the call. Why some political leader did work for big corporations, but cannot convince those corporations to invest in Liberia, but they want to be president. I mean, just go ahead and call the man name. Kind of dance around it. You're talking about Cummings, right? Cummings won't be president. He worked for a major corporation, but Flomo, guess what I would say to you? In fact, another executive from Coca-Cola, Josenti Fox, he became president of Mexico. But in fact, let me not talk too much about executives from Coca-Cola and being president. Let me tell you this one thing that when I was on the closing argument that Yeka Koluba said that threw me off. So Yeka Koluba has been going on this whole rant, and he's been raving and been criticizing President Boyka. And the one thing Yeka Koluba said was President Boyka shouldn't call him nephew. Every time he calls him nephew, something bad happens. He called my man Costa, my brother Costa, nephew, and you see what happened to Costa. So Yeka Koluba said, no, Boyka shouldn't call him, President Boyka shouldn't call him nephew because something bad happens. So I asked Yeka Koluba, I said, everything you know today, if this was October 1st, 2023, everything you know today, if you knew it back then, who would you vote for? Yeka Koluba said he would have voted for Alexander Cummings. I said, what? He said, yeah, I would vote for Alexander Cummings. So he knew that he wasn't going to vote for George Weah. He felt that now, based on the information he had, he wasn't going to support Boyka. So he felt that Alexander Cummings would have been a better person to become president. But again, we say history is a good teacher, right? You look at history, they say hindsight also is 20/20. If you can go back in the future, you'll be able to see things clear as day. But we don't have that ability to either look in the future or go in the past and change things. So we don't know. Alexander Cummings being able to bring Coca-Cola to Liberia. Coca-Cola is a major corporation. They've been around for decades. Sure, he may have been able to influence Coca-Cola to set up a factory or something in Liberia, but did Liberia have the necessary conditions to set up that factory? I mean, we can argue that maybe he could have influenced Coca-Cola to try to set up those conditions. We have factories in Liberia before, right? But I don't know. You just have to, and I think Liberia will keep doing this, electing different leaders and testing them out. You had United Party with Ellen. You had George Weah with the CDC. George Weah, in the first 3 years of his administration, received more money from the United States government than Ellen did. But Weah administration did struggle. Was it because of President Weah or the people surrounding him? Is it going to be because of Mr. Cummings, or is it going to be the people surrounding Mr. Cummings that are going to end up hurting him? We don't know. So I don't know. We have the richest man in Nigeria. Who's that? Dakante? I can never pronounce his name right. Who's investing in his country, creating jobs. It's always good. I mean, Nigeria has the largest economy in Africa. I think Nigeria, South Africa, those are all the big economies in. So he doesn't need to move his money to Europe or move his money to the United States. He may even end up getting in trouble with the U.S. Treasury Department, and then you end up paying taxes and a whole lot of other stuff in the U.S. So, yeah, he's investing his money in the country, but I think Mr. Cummings has some investments in Liberia. He has a nonprofit organization doing technology in Liberia. He's doing a lot of good things in Liberia, So, but let's not go backwards. Let's look forward and see what can be done with what's happening right now. And maybe Mr. Cummings is putting things together for 2029. Who knows? Who knows? Mercy, the new Commerce Minister Amin Modad he made a comment on a post, and he said something similar to what you're saying. Amin Modad was saying that he wanted Liberians to, let me see if I can find it real quick, but he was hoping that there can be some type of an investment fund by Liberians in the diaspora. Rwanda has something similar to that. Yeah, Rwanda has been very successful in terms of bringing money from the diaspora over to Rwanda to help with development. So you're asking, do you think diasporans forming small investment groups will be a good way to circumvent the trust issues? That is exactly the point I didn't want to say, but I was hoping that something that Brahma Kabara will be able to understand investment banking from the US. And Mercy, you just nailed it. Forming that in the diaspora, under the US banking system, the US banking system is highly regulated. You have the Securities and Exchange Commission, you have FINRA, you have the Federal Reserve Bank, you have the Treasury, you have all of these financial regulations. Even though when people try to game the system, they get busted. Ivan Boyski, the junk bond king, got busted, went to prison. Michael Milken, another junk bond guy, got busted. Even the billionaire, Martha Stewart, she got busted for insider trading, went to prison. You're looking at the guy who just passed away, ran the largest Ponzi scheme, Bernie Madoff. So, Marcy, that is exactly why you need someone who understands U.S. investment banking, because you have all these trust issues. The major accounting firms in the U.S., the Arthur Andersen, the ones who are still around, are the ones who were part of this major scam, Arthur Andersen, all these major companies, because they were getting some type of a kickback from some of these companies, they were turning a blind eye and allowing companies to mess around with their financial statements. That led to some serious financial stuff in this country. And eventually the US Congress came up with a law called the Sarbanes-Oxley. It's called SOX. There were major companies like WorldCom, Enron, all these major companies. The US put new laws in place that deals with the trust issue. So if you're looking to do something investment in America, you will fall under the US regulation. And if you're not trustworthy, the US is going to grab you and throw your butt in prison. That is the solution to the trust issue, to convince Liberians in the diaspora to invest in a fund that you can be able to use that money in Liberia and you can pay them an interest rate. Over here, you put your money in America, you put your money in a bank, what you collecting, like 0.5% of an interest or 1% interest. I invest in some sovereign debt. I buy Ghanaian bonds and some other country in Africa bonds because they pay a higher interest rate. So to Marcy's point, that is the way to go. That is the thing I was trying to explain to Amin Modad in that chat. And I called him, I texted him, called him before he made that chat. And I said, my man, you want to do some of these things that you're not talking to investment bankers, you're not talking to people who've been doing the thing for 30, 40 years, and you're sitting over there. I mean, sometimes these people, they say things, but they're not serious. They're not a serious group. What you say on HPX trying to invest in Liberia, I want to park that HPX conversation. I'm waiting for Jimmy and the rest of the guys to come back. So when I have Jimmy in here and I have my man Gabriel in here, we'll jump on the whole HPX business. But I don't want to talk about the HPX right now. And it's all tied into this whole concession thing, right? Giving people concession agreements, and then later on trying to do something to change the agreements you put in place, why it doesn't work. So Flomo, we'll come back to the HPX thing maybe next week, because that's going to be an important conversation. Very, very critical conversation that we need to talk about,
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I can hear you in the background. Is that you, Dennis?
That's end it. You can conclude now so we can end.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap up right now. In fact, I was just going to tell the people, thanks for joining, because my man Gabriel had technical issues. So just want to wrap it up. So if you can just run the music right now, I will say goodbye to everyone, and I'll see you guys next week.
We are Liberians.